This includes figures such as President Joe Biden, Martin Scorsese, Margaret Atwood, Judith Butler, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, Al Pacino, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Nancy Pelosi, Dame Helen Mir, Whoopi Goldberg, and a wide range of Nobel laureates, world leaders, Olympians, academics, and Oscar and Grammy Award winners. This year, our council has elected you, Cody Keenan, to the honour of receiving our gold medal Honorary Patronage for your outstanding contributions to politics and speech therapy.
Thank you, Ellen. Thank you, everybody. I know that Irish people really don't care when an American comes over and talks about our Irish heritage. Really fun anyway, and for good reason. Patrick Keenan left this place in 1750 to go start a party called America. And I'm the first Keenan ever to come back to Ireland through all those generations, which is cool. My first trip was right out of college with my best friend who we both broke. And so we bought the cheapest airlines ticket to Shannon and camp illegally every single night we were good. My second trip, I came over on Air Force One, the first black plane in the United States, which my ancestors probably would have flipped out most of it because even where the airplane was. And America didn't even exist at the time. This is not a 10th visit to Ireland. And I think if somebody could speak to my great-great-great-great-grandfather and tell him about this, he'd say, let me get this straight. I'm leaving this country with nothing. And someday when my ancestors will come back and you're just going to give him a piece of gold. So thank you very much for the honor and for all this. It's humbling. It's really, really cool and exciting. I love speaking to college students more than anything. I teach college students now. It inspires me, and I do my best to try to inspire young people to go into politics and public service in return. I've just written a book. I wish I brought it in here, but it's called Race, President Obama, 10 Days to Die for America. Go buy it. It's in Hot Springs. It's at Big Ray. It's at Books Upstairs. I just sold all signed all the copies today. But it's about, I hope, for two reasons. The first is just a story that I want to tell for future generations. It's about 10 days in June 2015 where it's not a memoirs. The book takes place over just 10 days, where America almost became a better version of itself. We actually did become a better version of ourselves, just in the total last. Brief synopsis, we entered those 10 days preparing for what we call SOTA Suite, which is when the Supreme Court hands down rulings on cases. And the two we were watching most closely was the second time Republicans tried to get Obamacare, and marriage law was up too. And we don't know which way the Supreme Court's going to rule. We don't know which day they're going to rule. We know it's going to be 10 in the morning, because that's when they hand it down. So we find out by watching TV like everybody else. So I prepared 4 speeches for each case, because there was a victory scenario, defeat scenario, and a couple scenarios in the middle. And as I'm working on that, victory was easy. Writing speeches where, what if the Supreme Court said, no, it doesn't matter if you work 2 jobs and don't have health care. I know you guys have to deal with this, so it sounds a little foreign, but what if we strip millions of Americans of their health insurance tomorrow? And you can't pay your kids' treatment anymore. What do I write to those people? What happens if the Supreme Court says no to marriage equality? And there would be a patchwork system left up to the states, but still, you'd be telling millions of Americans you're second-class citizens, you're going to take care of the rest of us. And as I'm thinking through those speeches on day 1 of the book, there was a mass shooting, another thing that the Irish don't deal with, or really anybody else, at a church in Charleston, South Carolina, and self-radicalized white supremacists went into Bible study in a black church and murdered 8 Christians and their pastor and said he wanted to start a race war. So you kind of go to higher limit on that. The president obviously has to speak on it. You want to try to, be some sort of moral compass for the country, but also, diffuse tensions. And then something extraordinary happened 2 days later. All of the family members of victims, these are people who lost their parents, their grandparents, their children. They weren't lost, they were taken from them. Just 40 hours before, they go to the killer's ring, one by one, even as they were crying and wailing and forgiving the killer. And that sort of changed the way America walked for a few days. Governors in the South, southern states, started kind of quietly ordering the Confederate flag to be lowered over the state capitals. And it shouldn't have been flying in the first place, but brought it down. I spoke to the former Republican congressman from the South when I book came out a couple months ago, and said, you need to understand how important that was. If Barack Obama had come out and said, take down that flag, we wouldn't have done it. But the fact that these families did this, it was kind of this profound shame settled over all of us, and we started doing it. And you really debated the loss as to whether or not President Obama would give you, he didn't want to. He had done a dozen congressionals, I don't think with those, and I didn't want to do it either. But he seized on what those families did and said, listen, I should go, even though I don't want to speak. I still don't know what I want to say. But he pointed at me and said, go talk about guns, talk about race, talk about the Confederate flag, and tie it all in this concept of race. And I just kind of stared at him, like, oh, is that all? And handed my way through the speech with a couple all-nighters, even as we're working on these honors. And all these questions were coming up with, what kind of country are we? Are we a good country? What are Americans? What do we believe? Who do we believe? Do we stand up for, equality? Do we stand up for people who, work hard but don't have health insurance? Do we stand up against white supremacy and bigotry and all those things? And as the week unfolded, I was just struggling with this speech, and then on the 9th day, that morning, the Supreme Court upheld Obamacare, so we could go out and do a big speech. The morning of the 10th day, the Supreme Court found right to marriage law. We just lost to you by a couple months, I think. So the president goes out and gives a speech, and we're starting, and I'm able to tie these speeches together at this point, so that it's all sort of told one story about what it means to be American, and how hard it is to make progress, how long it takes. And he called me into the Oval Office, no, it was the residence the night before midnight, and he had the draft speech at the end. And for the first time, the only time, he just crossed out pages 3 and 4, just one big line. And he completely rewritten the law. And it was beautiful. And he went down, as soon as he finished speaking the Rose Garden, popped out in the helicopter. He handed me back the draft. He had rewritten the back half around the lyrics to Basic Lyrics, the structure of that, which is, it was so simple I could kick myself. And he said, it feels like I'm singing. And I totally forgot to tell him else back at the White House that he had said that. So it ended up being a surprise to everybody that he sang Basic Lyrics. And then we came back to when it said, "Get up on all colors of the rainbow." And all of that happened in 10 days. I remember somebody writing at the time that it was just too implausible for the entire season of the West Wing. But it was almost frightening. It was thrilling, it was exciting, we were all very, very proud and happy and joyous. But it was almost frightening because it actually felt like it was starting to break free from the past and enter some new and exciting future. The future arrived just a little bit earlier than we thought. And obviously that didn't end up being the case because we lived through 4 years and opposite right after that. And many ways we still are. But it gets to the second reason why I wrote this book, which is kind of the second theme that I kind of snuck in there is it's for young people. I want young people to know that there's joy in public service, along with the frustration and cynicism that we're constantly fed on a daily basis. The system is often designed to sign change and frustrate you and keep things impermanent. But it can also be amazing, and it was, what those families did changed things. You can't give Obama credit for marriage equality. That was 50 years of struggle and sacrifice and blood, and some people even died. Universal health care, which we still don't have, even though Obamacare brought us closer than ever. So it's a 100-year struggle in the United States. It's still going on. So these things take time, and I'm constantly working with my own students who are idealistic and optimistic, despite the state of the world, to get in and fix it. So I'm trying to tell them, keep hold of that idealism. Don't ever let it go. But I want to temper it with a little bit of realism too, because this is hard, and it takes a long, long time, and it's frustrating, and you don't get everything you want. But it is worth it. It is fun. And so, one piece of advice I'll leave with you before I get to questions is, what I miss the most about working at the White House is not walking through the gates every day. It's not Air Force One, even though it's awesome. It's all the people I work with. And it's the fact that I had a collaborator in Barack Obama. And all of us are collaborators on this project. And so my advice to you would be, as you go out and try to change the world and make it better, fix this broken place in whatever little ways you can, find collaborators to do it with. You can't see the world on that. Find some friends who believe in the same things as you and latch yourself to them. And you're going to have a lot more fun that way. With lifelong friends, mentors, allies. this way, so don't be in a rush to leave everything else behind. Grab some friends while you're here, so let's change the world together. So thank you very much for having me here.
Well, a huge thank you to Cody for coming all the way here for this event and also for that beautiful speech. I just wanted to kickstart kind of the interview on asking you what inspired you to start speech writing. It's something that you're clearly so passionate about and were so excellent at it throughout your career, and Obama was so known for his speeches. And I wonder, was there a speech growing up or a politician or something that inspired you to public service and to pursue a career in giving back, I guess, and trying to make the world a better place?
Yeah, there was not a politician who inspired me to get into politics. My parents did, actually. My dad was a Republican. He no longer is. He was Republican. My mom's a Democrat. And they would just fight like cats and dogs at the dinner table. And I found it fascinating. It was like their version of a debate society. And I went to college as a pre-med student and flamed out of chemistry right away. So I went into the easier science, political science. And I just decided that was going to be my way that I could help make things better, that I could change people's lives. And so I moved to Washington right out of college, and I knew one person. We didn't have any family connections or anything like that in politics. So I knew one person who was a fraternity brother of mine at Northwestern University, go Cats. And he was doing Teach for America, so he was teaching in an underserved school. So he was no use to help me get a job. So I just hit the pavement it took me 3 months. Because I went in there a cocky kid, I went to a good school, I'd seen every episode of The West Wing, how hard can this be? Turns out everybody else in Washington had the same resume. So finally I took an unpaid internship in Ted Kennedy's office, the youngest Kennedy brother. And that was my greatest education. He had the best staff on the Hill, even Republicans will tell you that. The biggest staff on the Hill, they'd been around for decades, and he had passed countless laws that had changed people's lives in all sorts of ways. And it was great, and I was just hooked, and I wanted to stay there forever. I never thought about speech writing. I was a policy aide for him by the time I left. What got me into speech writing was, and I don't have to kiss his butt anymore because he's not my boss anymore, it was Barack Obama. While I was working for Ted Kennedy, the Democratic Party convention was in Boston, Massachusetts in 2004. And so we all took a week off work and went up, and our reward for that was a floor pass for one night of the convention. And mine was for, I think it was Tuesday night. And that's when this young state senator, like a state legislator, not even a senator yet, from Illinois, Barack Obama, took the stage and blew everybody's mind. And it shows you what the power of good speech is. He walked into the Fleet Center anonymous. 19 minutes later, he walked out a global megastar, politically speaking. And I was just hooked. This was a guy who was talking about politics the way I really wanted it to be. And even so, I loved my job. It was great. But I still tried to figure out when Barack Obama was speaking on the Senate floor so I could watch, something like that. And a moment came where I had the opportunity to join his campaign in Chicago, my hometown of all places. Like, who gets to work on a presidential campaign in their own hometown? And I jumped at it as a speechwriting intern because I'd written a few speeches for Ted Kennedy by the end. I just kind of held on for 14 years in my first speechwriting job.
Yeah, and in terms of, I guess, that transition from an intern in Washington to one of the most prolific speechwriters, and obviously being chief speechwriter in the White House, I wonder for you, in terms of that transition, how did you navigate that? Was there ever elements of imposter syndrome? And also, how did you kind of come to climb the ranks to such a high degree over that kind of span of 14 to 16 years?
Yeah, total imposter syndrome. And I read about this in the book too, about how difficult it was to write for him. What helps is colleagues, like I was talking about, and mentors. And, his first chief speechwriter, John Favreau, knew him inside and out because they'd spent 2 years together in the Senate honing a worldview. But we were a different White House. We were on the longest presidential campaign in history because Hillary Clinton stayed in all the way through the primaries. And that really just kind of forged us into a family. We were all working 12 hours a day, 14 hours a day in Chicago. Then we'd go out for a couple hours and have some beers and then come back and do it all over again the next morning. And we all lived together when we worked in the White House. Some of us married our colleagues. I met my wife at the White House. And I joke with the Obamas now that they've got dozens of little grandbabies running around the country from people who met either in Iowa working for them or in the White House working for them or in cabinet agencies. And the president always says, yeah, but nobody has named a kid Barack yet. that's what gets you through. But I had imposter syndrome. I couldn't believe it when they picked me for chief speechwriter in the second term. The first thought I had was, are you sure? And then it was like, everyone's going to figure out that I'm a fraud because I don't have John to help me out and edit me and whatnot. But it worked out. And the president kept me on for 4 more years after the White House. But you get through that by working with extraordinary people and leaning on extraordinary people and asking for help and trusting a team around you.
Yeah. And I guess you touched on that in your address in terms of finding collaborators and finding people. And in those 10 days of grace, I guess I wanted to ask you why you felt so passionately to write the book. And then I noticed that your daughter is also called Grace. So I wanted to ask you kind of what that word means to you now, and why it's so important to you to hold on to grace. Yeah.
Well, I didn't want to write a memoir after I left the White House. A lot of people did that, and I just felt too young and it felt a little too self-serving, with no offense to the memoirs that are really good. But I helped the president with his for 4 years, and then I left to work on this, and it was just that those 10 days were kind of seared in my memory, but I didn't have the idea to turn it into a story until the Trump years, because we were now living through the mirror opposite. And it was actually on the 2nd anniversary of day 10 in the book. You know, I noticed someone tweet out that it was the 2nd anniversary of marriage equality, which made me think of that whole week. And Trump had done his usual thing that morning where he just like says something stupid on Twitter and gets everybody fighting about it all day long. And that's basically what America did for 4 years. And I decided to do a little tweet storm about those 10 days just to try to buck people's spirits. And it took off in a way I wasn't expecting. And Esquire magazine wrote it up, and I thought, you know, there's a book here. So the pandemic finally gave me time to write it. And then Grace, our daughter, was born as I was writing it. So we named her first, and then the book. And my wife always jokes that I'm gonna have to write a book named with the same name as our second kid, or we're gonna have significant therapy bills. What does it mean to me? I didn't know much about the concept, you know. I had always just used it in terms of the word graceful, and it was after what those families did, and Obama brought up the concept of grace. And I actually called this pastor right after that meeting in the Oval Office and said, explain this to me. Because he came up in the AME church, the African Methodist Church, which is one of the churches where the massacre took place. And he explained it as the free and unmerited favor of God, basically, you know, mercy and grace even when we don't deserve it. It's kind of like it's turning the other cheek, taking that first step towards reconciliation and progress, even when you don't maybe feel like it. And for our daughter, it's just, you know, we found out we were pregnant 2 weeks before New York City shut down for COVID. And, you know, through all the tumult of COVID and the protests that summer and a contested election in the fall, it was a relatively and remarkably complication-free pregnancy. She kicked at the same time every night. She was like the little beacon of hope throughout the whole thing. So Chris and I looked at each other and we were just like, her name's Grace.
Yeah, that's really lovely. And I suppose that kind of touching on hope and kind of having that kind of grace. I remember when Obama came in 2011, I was only little, but I remember going in to see him speech. And I remember at the time, Ireland was going through such like turmoil and such difficulty, similar to the pandemic, massive recession, economic crisis. And I wonder for you, I know you want to speak a little bit about that speech and that trip, and what that kind of meant to you to be, I guess, back in Ireland, back to your roots, and write a speech for a country that was really, really struggling at that time.
It was some of the best 10 hours of my life, because we were only here for 10 hours. I begged to write that speech. You know, as a junior writer, I still wasn't quite on the foreign trip beat, but I pushed really hard for it. I made sure to crush. There is no other interest group in the world that gets 3 speeches on the same day every single year. The Irish do for St. Patrick's Day, so I made sure to crush the St. Patrick's Day remarks in 2009 and 2010 and 2011 to get to do this trip. And as I was trying to figure out what to write, Samantha Power came into my office, and she said, hey, listen, the one thing you should know is just how morose the country is right now. Like, there's this kind of like deep sadness there that I've never seen before. So what if Obama just went over and injected it with a shot of joy? I was like, great, sounds great. That sounds a lot easier than anything else. So I wrote what I thought was a pretty fun speech. We flew over, we went to Moneygall first, of course, and you know, everybody likes to joke about that, but he was moved by it. People forget that, you know, because of the color of his skin, he was raised by his white mother and his white grandparents. You know, that side of his family is just as important to him as any other. And he just kind of marveled that he said, you know, this is the town where my great-great-great-grandfather grew up and walked around, and that's pretty cool. He has not been to Obama Plaza, but I have. It's cool. But it was great. And then we came back to College Green, and it was the worst helicopter ride I've ever been on. It was just turbulent as heck, pouring down rain. And as soon as we landed, the clouds parted and the sun came out, and we got to give this speech to 25,000 people. And I was like, this is the best day of my life. Then it got worse. We went back to the hotel and checked in, and people were, what's the pub? I think we were at the Marion. I can't remember. And what's the pub right across the street? Foley's, maybe? I think somebody had prepared a big party there, and I think the ambassador did. There was food and a live band and like female dancers in red, white, and blue get-ups, and I was like, this is going to be the best night of my life. And then we get an email saying, you have to be in the motorcade in 30 minutes. We're leaving because of the volcano in Iceland. The Air Force said they can't fly through that, and if we don't leave now, we could be stuck here for a week. And I was like, well, don't threaten me with a good time. What's wrong with that? But so we had to go, and so Ben Rhodes, who was the president's national security writer, came by my room and he was like, dude, let's just go get a couple pints real quick. And we sprinted across the street, I think it was Foley's, and just down 2 pints, and then we had to go, which was really, really sad.
Yeah. Yeah, and I wonder in terms of like memories, I guess you probably have great times in terms of the kind of community and family that you made along the way in terms of the White House, and having all of those memories of sharing beers and just travel and trips and things. And I wonder, is there any like big memory that stands out for you where I know those 10 days were really significant, but is there any kind of other memories that really stick with you from your time in the White House? Oh,
tons. We called them foreign trips just as shorthand, but that was a rare chance where you get to hang out with colleagues that you don't always get to hang out with. We try to finish up our work and then go explore a new city that, I've now been to Asia 10 times, but never on my own, because I can't afford to fly to Asia. But I would go with the President of the United States, and then, we'd kind of lean on each other, finish your work quickly, because we're gonna go out. We're gonna go see Kuala Lumpur, we're gonna go out in Laos. Those were always fun, just getting to be with friends. I don't know if you're leading me towards the Paris question, but I pulled an infamous all-nighter in Paris because the president had no edits to the speech I was writing for the next day, so I was off duty. And 12 of us went out to dinner, which is great because we just don't get to spend time with each other like that much. But 4 of us ended up staying out all night long and coming back to the hotel at 7:30 in the morning as people were dressed and ready for the motorcade. And we got a little scolding. And somebody dimed us out to the president, who came back and found us on Air Force One, pretty hungover, and said, oh, Movable Feast is back. And that's how the Hemingway nickname stuck. It has nothing to do with my actual writing. And then we did suffer for it, because our next stop was Nicolas Sarkozy's ratings were tanking, so he put on a reenactment of D-Day at Normandy. That was 3 hours long. Like, there were thousands of people sitting there in these grandstands. The president's there, the queen's there, all these world leaders are there. And it was like 98 degrees. So Ben and I are just sitting under the bleachers. There's like bombs going off everywhere. We're just sweating. We're like, this is terrible. When is this going to end? The actual D-Day was shorter than this.
Oh, wow. Sounds like quite the experience. And could I ask you, just before we, I guess, open up to the Q&A, I wanted to touch on, I guess the Obama White House for so many was so many firsts and such a progressive time in US politics. And I wonder, seeing that transition in terms of Trump's White House and also in terms of speech writing, I think Obama was so well known for his thoughtful and well-spoken kind of rhetoric, and oftentimes Trump was a little bit more liberal with his words, to put it lightly. And I wonder, for you, looking at that, even now, how do you feel in terms of the legacy of Obama, and do you think that will ever be recovered in terms of the US legacy of?
Yeah. It's going to take a while, but yeah. I mean, to just answer the last part of your question first, one of the most pernicious aspects of Trump is how does the rest of the world take America at its word from now on if we're going to elect someone like that again? I worry about that. That just takes a long time. That credibility takes a long time to come back. But the one thing it should teach everybody is that progress is really fragile, and you can't take it for granted. I mean, we just, the Supreme Court with the Dobbs decision just overturned the right to choose in the United States, which is something that people just assumed was going to be around forever. A couple of the justices want to go after marriage equality. Progress is something that has to be protected and expanded upon, and you don't always get it all at once, and it is very frustrating, and sometimes it makes you want to just say, forget it, what's the point? But if you can get half of what you want, protect that, and then go get half of the next part, now you're 75% of the way there. It just takes work, it takes time, it takes constant struggle and persistence and faith. And, you know, President Obama, when I was talking with him the morning after the election, as we were trying to figure out what he should say, he said, you know, people in Washington always kind of poke fun at me for being the hope guy, but you don't need hope when things are going well. You need hope when things are at their darkest. That's when you need hope, and it's subversive. And you know, you can almost wield it like a weapon when you need to the most. When things are the darkest, that's when you need to be most hopeful and inspire other people to be hopeful too.
No, absolutely. And again, thank you so much for that, I guess, speech and address. And I guess I want to open up to everyone here to ask any questions they want to ask Cody Keenan. I'm sure there will be tons from the floor. But does anyone have anything they would like to ask? Yeah, Jonathan.
This is probably a very basic question, and you can probably speak for ages, but what rules do you follow and what tips would you have to make a really good speech?
Speak like a human. Seriously, there are so many politicians who don't, who get trapped in hackneyed phrases that they feel like poll test well, or you know, I always poked fun at, not to poke fun at people now, but I always poked fun at Hillary Clinton for saying over and over again, the middle class is the middle of my priorities. Well, I get the repetition of middle, fine, but shouldn't it be like one of your highest priorities? Let's think through this before we say it. You know, and Joe Biden's always talking about building an economy from the bottom up and the middle out. I know what that means, but like, does anybody actually really say that? You know, I wish this economy worked from the bottom up and the middle out. Like, talk like a human. Be colloquial. There's no shame in it. You know, my students, you can always tell when they're trying to impress me in the first couple weeks of class because they're writing too lofty for the assignment. You know, they're all trying to sound Kennedy-esque. And most speeches don't lend themselves to that. Some do, eulogies, commencements, inaugural addresses, but most of Obama's best speeches was when he was just being colloquial and speaking to people where they are. You know, my rule on a big policy speech with my speechwriters was, you know, if they were too wonky, I'd give it back and say, go rewrite this as if you're explaining it to your best friend in a bar. Then you know it's ready. You know, you don't need to beat your head over the audience with a bunch of buzzwords and phrases and lingo that they don't know. Speak like a human. Really, that's rule number one.
Thank you so much. Does anyone else have any other? Abby? Yeah.
So you talked in your book about authors and musicians that President Obama introduced to you as a tool for speechwriting. Are there any that you like still go back to frequently when you're writing now or just in your personal life?
Yeah, great question. Thank you for reading. He taught me a couple lessons through jazz. I went in with another speechwriter to talk to him. So he was scheduled to give a speech on the 50th anniversary of Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech from the exact same place. And that's just talk about being set up to fail, you know? Like, hey, we'd like you to honor the greatest speech in history by going back to the exact same moment and speaking. It's like, no, what? So I went in to try to shake some ideas loose from what should we talk about. And he was like, look, man, I don't want to give this speech, like for that exact reason. So I'll think about it. But in the meantime, you go start writing, you know, with no problem. You go start writing and read James Baldwin if you're stuck and listen to John Coltrane if you're not. And then he left to play golf. And I was like, what does that mean? But it was pretty sage advice because James Baldwin has this way of writing that is like a hot knife through butter. You know, he reminds you that there are such concepts as right and wrong. And it's okay to write and speak that way. And then Coltrane is kind of this, I was never a jazz guy. Coltrane is kind of this free-form jazz that sort of almost made my fingers feel like they knew what they were doing on the keyboard. The other one is he told me to listen to Miles Davis. Because what was great about Miles Davis is it was the notes that he doesn't play, it's the spaces between. And he said that for a particularly dense speech. He said, you know, this needs some breath in it, some emotional moments, some levity, some laughter, some spaces. So go listen to Miles Davis and find me some silences. As for what I really listened to when I was writing, it totally depended on the tone of the speech and the mindset I was trying to get in. Like when the economic crisis was at its worst, I listened to a lot of Bruce Springsteen, you know, hard-working factory towns trying to come back. If it was a really complicated speech where I couldn't have words in my head as I was trying to come up with them, I'd listen to some movie soundtracks. The soundtrack to The Social Network is excellent for writing.
There you go. Perfect. Do we have any other questions from the audience? Yeah.
Is there any added layer of difficulty or complication with writing a speech that is to be delivered by someone else? Because obviously, when you're writing that in your own voice, does that need to be contacted with? Like, is that something that you had to deal with when writing
Yeah, it's not your own voice. It is entirely that other person's voice. So if you're having a conflict with that, you're probably not cut out to be a speechwriter. Now that happens to every speechwriter at first, but you need to fully inhabit the person. You need to understand not just what they want to say, but why they want to say it. You need to know stories from their life that have influenced their thinking. You are that person as you're writing. So it was actually more difficult for me to write my book because I was trying for the first time in 14 years to write in my own voice and figure out what that was again, because it had just merged with his in a way that was difficult to break. And my editor actually asked me to go back at the end of the book and rewrite chapters 1 and 2. Because she said, over the course of this manuscript, you've broken free from Obama's voice, but the first couple chapters still kind of sound like him. So I need you to go back and write those as you. But yeah, and then all that only comes with spending time with the person you're writing for. It's just the most important thing in that collaborative relationship.
You said that it's pretty difficult when you're writing a speech and it's delivering bad news, like when it comes to an eulogy, and you said that Obama had to attend so many. How did you change it up every time to still, assemble people within your speech, yet then knowing that nothing really seems to change?
Yeah, that's the hardest part. And one thing I left out earlier is one of the reasons why he didn't want to give a eulogy in 2015 is we had basically pushed aside our second-term agenda in 2013 to try to do something about guns, background checks, after 20 little children were murdered in a classroom. And Republicans in the Senate wouldn't even allow a vote on it. They just knocked it down with the parents of the kids watching from the gallery. And that was as cynical and dark as I've ever seen the president get. He came back in, and I know he was just venting, but right after he spoke in the Rose Garden that day, surrounded by the parents of those kids, he said, the next time this happens, I don't want to speak. What am I going to say? We've just decided as a country we're not going to do anything about this anymore. And that's one of the reasons why he didn't want to speak at Charleston. But you have to give people something to grasp onto. And the way we approached eulogies was the first half is how we want to remember these people. What are the important things out of their lives? If you can make someone laugh, if you can make an audience laugh at a eulogy, you're a great speechwriter. And you should try it. The way these people left is sad, but the way they lived their life was not sad. And you need to remind people of that. And then we would take one of those lessons and turn that into kind of a broader sermon on what are our responsibilities now that these people are gone. And that was different for every shooting, both for Tucson, for Newtown, for Charleston, for all the others. And if you can make people laugh and think and inspire them at a eulogy, in addition to the crying which comes on its own, then you've done your best.
Yeah, absolutely. And we take one more, yeah?
What advice would you give to a young person that does want to get into public service and how to balance ideals and practice?
How do you balance what, sorry?
Your ideals but also being pragmatic.
My advice is do it. Just do it. Jump in. Go. It's so worth it. It really is. Even through the frustration. We didn't get everything done that we wanted to. We didn't even half done what we wanted to. And a lot of it is just being stymied by the system. Some of it was our own mistakes, but we have this ridiculous rule in the Senate where you need 60 votes to pass anything instead of 50. And that blocked us from doing a lot of important stuff. When the background checks legislation was in there we had 55 votes. That should be enough to pass something, but you need 60. So it can be tremendously frustrating. And another angle of this is, even from the left, we get a lot of criticism that we didn't do it all, right? That we didn't institute a single-payer universal healthcare system, or I don't remember what all the other complaints are. There are a lot, but we didn't have 60 votes. That's the reality of it. We had 59 for a single-payer system, and there's nothing you can do about that. Short of finding photos of that senator in an illicit tryst and then threatening to post them on the internet, which we should have done. I'm not saying anything about a certain senator. I don't know. But I don't see a conflict between idealism and realism. Realism is understanding the world as it is, with your eyes wide open, and idealism is fighting for the world as it should be anyway. And too often I think people let the realism, they let it make them surrender. You know, if I'm not going to get everything I want right now, then why go vote? Well, I'll tell you why. In 2014, most of our voters didn't show up to vote for midterm elections. So we lost the United States Senate to Republicans. And then when Barack Obama got to put up his third Supreme Court nominee, Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, decided for the first time in American history, we're not going to give a nominee a vote. We're just not going to do it. And there's nothing we could do about that. No amount of public pressure is going to get Mitch McConnell, no number of soaring speeches is going to get Mitch McConnell to change his mind, because that was what was best for him and his party politically. And then as soon as Trump won, they rushed through 3 nominees, which changed the balance of the court for 30 years, which led to the Dobbs decision, all because we didn't get enough voters in 2014. And I know it drives people nuts to hear you need to vote in every election. It drives people crazy. But it's also true, you know, and I've never figured out a clever rhetorical way around that. Because there are a lot of people who do vote in every election, and they say, I'm not seeing what I want. It takes a long time. That's democracy, and it's unsatisfying. Like, it sounds like I'm making an excuse for it. I don't know what I want either. There's a lot of things that I want. But I guess my advice to somebody who does get really down about it and cynical about it is pick one issue. And that's hard for Democrats because we care about everything. But pick one issue and make that your issue. Be a single-minded voter on that issue, and just keep voting and keep pushing until you do get what you want. And you might not. But I promise you, when the day comes that you do, the joy that comes on that day is so much better than just giving up because this way you'll never get hurt. You know, those few, there are really big victories in politics are really rare. You don't get many. Marriage equality was one of them. Killing bin Laden was one of them, but that's different. That's not policy. Getting health care passed was one of them. You know, you don't get many, but it's what you do on all the days in between. You know, if you've just moved the ball forward a couple inches, you can go to sleep happy, because all those inches eventually add up to a touchdown, and it just takes time. You know, we were in the White House for 2,922 days, and if you can go home thinking you pushed that boulder just a little bit up the hill that day, that's a good feeling.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. And if we're going to end on one last one to lighten the mood a little bit before we move on, could I ask, if you were on a desert island and you can only bring one book, one movie, and one song with you, what would you bring?
Wow. God, that's such a good question. One book, okay. How do I, besides mine?
Which you should all buy.
Yeah. Man, I don't know. One book for the rest of my life. I'm missing the boat here in a big way. It might be the biography, one of the biographies of Bobby Kennedy. I don't know. It's the first thing that comes to mind. One song. There's a 10-minute live version of. So I'm cheating here, where it's a mix of Bad 40 and Where the Streets Have No Name by U2. So that way I'm getting 3 songs in one.
I thought you were going to say the 10-minute version of All Too Well. I totally switched out for a second.
No, my wife would take that one.
Yeah.
And then one movie. What's my favorite movie? I don't know if I've ever had one. Braveheart, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I should be prepared for this question. Why can't I think of my favorite things?
Well, anyway, thank you so much for coming, and that was such an inspiring thought, and really, I think everyone will take something away from that. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
And a
Thank
big
you all
round of
for
applause
coming
for Cody Keenan. Thank you so much. And I suppose I should end by giving you your gold medal of Honorary Patronage.
Thanks. Patrick Keenan would be so excited. Yeah, that's so cool. Thank you.
Talk